Yeah, so here I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. Thank you so much for coming along today. So my name is Zita Kassai and I represent NYU Abu Dhabi here in the Europe region, in Serbia, among other regional countries. And so I'm happy to give you an overview of what we would like to see in the recommendation letter, whether you are a counselor, a teacher, or a student yourself. I hope this session is going to be useful because, um, as we have observed with Education USA, the letter of recommendation can sometimes be a very much overlooked part of the application material. So we really want to make sure that we set you up for success by advising you how to go best about these parts of the application material. So I also wanted to give you a quick overview of the session today. I'm not sure if we are going to be able to cover all of this that I prepared for today, but I will try to make sure to include the most useful parts for you. So in the first part, I just really wanted to give you a sort of overview of the NYU Global Network, just to give you sort of an idea of what a global university like NYU looks like. And then we will also talk about the admissions requirements, mostly just to give you a sort of context for the whole application procedure and how it looks like with private American US institutions like NYU and NYU Abu Dhabi specifically. We will also break the ice with some questions I prepared for you. Then we will dive more deeply into what's sort of expected to be seen in the letter of recommendation. We will share some do's and don'ts of a strong letter. And if we have some time towards the end, I'm not sure if we will have time for this, but I would also like to look at a few case studies with you. And I will also try to make sure that we have time for questions. But even as I go on, please feel free to interrupt me anytime, either by raising your hand or even unmuting yourself and or just putting your questions in the chat box. So, as promised, I wanted to give you an overview of what a global university like NYU looks like. So, more and more US universities are sort of expanding their network beyond the US, for example, to even some faraway locations. So, in the case of NYU, we are present in as many as 6 different continents, including the US. But we also have a main campus in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the United Arab Emirates, and also Shanghai, which is the largest city in China. So these main locations, New York City, Abu Dhabi, and Shanghai, these will be the anchors of the whole global network of NYU. So once someone becomes an NYU student, they're going to be able to call one of these their home campus. But once someone becomes an NYU student, they are not only going to have access to these locations only, but they will also have access to all of these other places that you can see highlighted in this slide that I'm showing you here in this global network. So, for example, students will be able to take semesters abroad in Los Angeles or even Washington, D.C. or Buenos Aires, numerous locations around Europe, as you can see, and we even have Sydney and Accra and Tel Aviv as our locations. And these smaller locations are not full campuses, so you cannot pursue your full degree or the entirety of your 4-year education only in these places, but you're going to be able to take either longer term, like semesters abroad in these places, or even shorter term programs like what we call a January term, where you spend the entire duration of January in one single location in an immersive subject. And we also have additional programs like summer internship programs, even our internships, all very much global. And then some seminars, even at NYU Abu Dhabi, they even have like field trip components. So the whole idea is that we are not only a very international university in the sense that we are welcoming students from more than 135 different nationalities in New York City and Abu Dhabi. But we also try to make sure that students who are interested in pursuing a very unique academic trajectory, they're able to have access to this whole global network and make connections that are going to be important not just for their academics, but also for their professional life later on. So this is basically what the NYU Global Network stands for in a nutshell. And about the application process, again, I wanted to provide some context to the recommendation letter and where it stands in the whole application material. So in terms of application, no matter which campus you're applying to at NYU, you will have to provide what we call the common application form, where you will have to provide different materials, both academic and extracurricular, and some other materials. So in the first part of the common application, you will be able to choose what campuses you're interested in when it comes to universities like NYU that have several campuses, but you will also be able to say which US universities you would like to apply to in case the universities you apply to are using the common application form. You will also need to invite a teacher or a counselor from your school who's going to be able to help you with some of the additional aspects of the application. They are going to be responsible for uploading a school report on your behalf, also official documents like the transcript and other documents, and also write you a good recommendation letter, which is going to be our focus here today. And in terms of the materials, and this is going to be very much so with not just universities like NYU, but also other US universities, you're going to have to submit the following. So you will have to submit your transcripts, including all your 4 years of secondary school education. You will also need to submit some sort of test scores. In some cases, this might be optional. And in cases of universities like NYU, we are even test flexible, meaning that you don't need to submit SAT or ACT, but you can also instead apply with other nationally accredited school leaving examination results like the Matura, or even some international results like the IB exam, APs, etc., if you're attending such a school. We would also need, of course, a letter of recommendation. In some cases, universities are accepting not just one, but more of these. I think maybe two, just maybe three would be the number to go for, just so the university can learn about you as a personality from these different aspects. We will also need English language testing results. Luckily, NYU is very flexible in these regards as well, meaning we not only accept IELTS or TOEFL, but also other results like Cambridge, Pearson, and even the Duolingo English exam. And finally, the personal statement is going to be a very important portion of the application material because just like with the recommendation letter, this is going to be really the place where we can learn some qualitative information about the applicant. So what are their personal traits or characteristics that really make them stand out in the applicant pool? And as you can see on the left side of this slide, we have also included the deadlines. So US universities, and this is also something very American, I think, which is not something that we are really used to in the European system, is the fact that you're going to be able to choose from different deadlines. So it's going to be up to you as an applicant which deadline you would like to apply by. For example, at NYU, we have early decision 1 and 2 and regular decision. And just to explain the difference between these, with early decision 1 or 2, a student can only apply to one US university, and it will be a binding decision, meaning if they are granted admission, they are going to have to enroll to that specific university. Whereas for a regular decision, one can apply to several US universities, and it's not a binding decision. But one definite advantage of early decision, either one of these two, is that you're going to learn your admissions decision very early on. So it will leave you some room to play around with some other additional applications just in case. Okay. I just wanted to mention in a very tiny nutshell that at NYU Abu Dhabi specifically, we have a very interesting and I think unique part of the application process, which is sort of like the next step after a student applies through the common application. They might be invited to an in-person weekend at NYU Abu Dhabi, where we invite all the students who are considered very strong candidates, but we are still considering whether we would like to see them at NYU Abu Dhabi or not. It's basically a mandatory in-person weekend at NYU Abu Dhabi on campus, where the university takes care of all the costs, and it involves different formal and less formal elements like interviews, sample classes, spending lots of time on campus, and also an additional trip to the desert just to experience the local culture and environment as well. And once someone submits the Common App, gets to spend the candidate weekend in Abu Dhabi, comes back, they are going to be notified of their admissions decision within 1 or 2 weeks. So this is sort of like an example of what interviews might look like in some cases. And finally, before we talk about the letter of recommendation in more detail, I also wanted to share a few details about the financial aid process at NYU. So NYU-wide, we give what we call need-based financial aid, meaning that you have to apply through the so-called CSS profile. It's a different form, different from the common application, where you have to provide documentation about your family's income, like bank statements, information about income, assets, etc., based on which we can award you a need-based financial support, meaning that if you have nothing to do with your academic merits, but only with your individual family's financial circumstances. So in the case of NYU Abu Dhabi specifically, it can even be any amount between a 0 and 100% even. So a few select students even get 100% scholarship, but most of them usually receive some sort of partial aid, which can really be any amount besides the 100%. And as you can see, submitting the CSS profile will have its own deadlines, simply just to give you some more time in between submitting the Common App and collecting all these documents. So that's it about NYU and NYU Abu Dhabi in a nutshell. And here I wanted to step more into the letter of recommendation mindset. And in order to just pick our brains a bit before we go into this session, I'm not sure whether you're students or maybe even counselors in this seminar, but still, some of these questions might evoke something for you. So I think we could even go to the second one, like, not the second one, but even the third one. Like, what is the process when preparing a letter of recommendation, whether you are a teacher or a student in this case?
Hi, I got my recommendation letter from my teacher, and I'm still waiting for my counselor to write me a recommendation. Actually, my teacher from American high school offered himself if he wanted to write me a recommendation letter, and of course I said I yes, and he finished it a few weeks ago. But my counselor from my Serbian school, she was a bit stunned. But I explained to her what the process is, so she will help me out.
I don't know if you can hear me well, but yes, I did. I obtained all three, I think, recommendation letters, and I have had a problem with counselor recommendation because it was really complicated, the process, and people like teachers in Serbia aren't used to it. So I really helped out my counselor. But I need to ask a question actually. What are your opinions on students writing their own recommendation letters, if you understand what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good question to start with. Well, honestly, from what I've been shared from the admissions team side, I think that's not really a trend to really follow because we want these letters of recommendations to be sincere in every aspect. Because we are reading them in good faith that the student has had plenty of interaction with the teacher who is writing it. So I think in some cases, the admissions team, especially the ones who are really familiar with reading recommendation letters, they might be even able to tell if that's the case that the students themselves were writing the recommendation letter. So I think that's not really a practice that we would recommend to students. Even though we know that in some cases it might be hard, especially as you mentioned that with Serbian teachers who are not necessarily used to this process of recommending, it might be challenging, but still, we would encourage everyone to submit these recommendation letters in earnest. Especially, and I will talk about this more. I do not want to just spoil it yet, but we really want to see something meaningful. So, some actual interactions that took place between the teacher and the student they are recommending. So, It shouldn't just be some generic template that they are using, but some actual qualitative information that we would like to see.
I
Hi.
haven't asked my professors about letters of recommendation, but from some previous professors from competitions, I asked them, and they were wondering what should they write about there and
Mhm.
how to write it. That was the first question they asked.
Oh, perfect. So I'm hoping this seminar is going to be useful in that aspect because even after the session, I would like to share some materials which might be especially useful for your teachers on how to kickstart the whole recommendation process and for you to have a conversation in the first place. But it's good that we are having everyone from different perspectives, like having the American school perspective where they are already very prepared and familiar with the process, then the public school one, and someone who hasn't had their recommendation letters written. So thank you so much for sharing. And so, as promised, I really wanted to go into the more detailed process and really talk about the recommendation letter and how one should think about it. And I'm hoping that you will also be able to convey this to your teachers or your recommenders. So, just to pick our brains about the recommendation letter, it should contribute to a more holistic review process, meaning that, again, as I said, and I know I will sound like a broken record, but we really want to see some new information. So, something that's not already written in your application, but something that is extra or even gives some context to the information that's already been provided in your extracurriculars, your academic results, your competition results, or anything beyond that that adds some extra information for us to really see the whole picture about you and place you in context within your immediate surroundings at your school. It should also serve to view the students from the perspective of those who know them well and to interact with them regularly. So sometimes we get this question whether they should have their letters of recommendation from maybe a really high profile person, like even the principal, even if they haven't really known them that well in person for the past few years. I would say that we are not really encouraging students to do that. We are just encouraging the opposite. So it should rather be a teacher of any subject than the principal, as long as they can provide some qualitative and meaningful information about you as a person. And we will talk about that in more detail soon. The next point is it should play an important role in highlighting qualitative intellectual performance, social abilities, and their personal characteristics. So again, it should add some more information to how we view the student's personality, because in the academics part, in the transcripts, we can see their academic abilities, but we would also like to see as much as possible about this person within the limits of the application material, and both the personal statement and the letter of recommendation serve this very purpose. It should provide context or background information not evident in other parts of the application, so I sort of covered this already. And it may give unique insight into specific moments, actions, or habits that make a student stand out. So I think this is really the part where a recommendation letter can really stand out, where the teacher or counselor who's writing you the recommendation letter is able to capture specific moments or stories or highlights from your academic career or even your personal life or academics if they know about, or extracurriculars if they know about that. So these specific stories or anecdotes are going to be the ones that make letter of recommendation stand out in the applicant pool. But again, we will cover more details about this too. So here I really wanted to give you a more concise list of all the information that your teachers or counselors should strive to include in their letter of recommendation. So the first item would be the achievements and leadership qualities or leadership roles that they have observed in you as an applicant. But this is just the basis of where we start in the letter of recommendation. It should also talk about academics, like give us some specific insights and context about the information that's already been provided in your transcripts, your grades, your results, test results, and so on. And it should also include some comparisons, if possible, like when compared to your entire class, like the 11th or the entire senior class that's currently graduating, where can they place you in that context academically and also in the extracurricular and leadership capacity? Um, Again, the next item is examples. So I think the more examples the recommender can provide, the better, because that's really the qualitative information that we are looking for. Stories and maybe even input from other teachers. So if your recommender has time and the capacity, they might as well go ahead and talk to other teachers who know you really well and could potentially weigh in with some additional insights or stories about you from their specific subjects. Progression and growth. So just like with the transcripts, here in the recommendation letter, we would also like to see your overall trajectory, not just academically, but also your personality, your development story. This is also what we want to see in the personal statement and also in the recommendation letter, like where you started when you entered high school and where you ended up at the end of your career, how you were making use of all the facilities provided to you and all the means provided to you at your high school. And finally, it should provide explanations of challenges if you have faced some of these. So in case you have some specific challenges, both personally, in your personal life or academically or in some other sense, it might not hurt if the teacher can also comment on that, of course, within reasonable limits. Okay, in terms of the language and the form itself, I also wanted to give you some additional insights or do's. So when it comes to best practices, specific language should be always the direction to go, so to speak, because we would like it to be as concise as possible, and using a very direct language really allows us to really understand what's going on and what are the different qualities that they are trying to communicate to us. Using examples, again, I will sound like a broken record, but examples can really not hurt any letter of recommendation. Highlighting core themes. So just like with the personal statement, it might not be a good idea. It might be a good idea to actually identify a few key characteristics or personal stories or qualities that you would like to highlight. So maybe this would be something that you can sit down and discuss even together with your counselor or teacher, like 2 or 3 key core themes that you can identify and would like to see in the letter of recommendation. It goes without saying that we would like to see personal characteristics, and I would like you to think about the fact that the admissions team officers who are going to be reading your application, they're going to be reading hundreds of applications, so you really want to make sure that your application stands out and highlights your unique characteristics that are specific to you as an applicant. And also at the same time, you're not going to be able to meet with the admissions team officers at this point in the application journey yet. So that's why you also really want to make sure to highlight specific personal characteristics unique to you. Another thing which might be very obvious, but I think we cannot highlight this enough, that the letter of recommendation should give you the definitive vote of support. So it shouldn't be like sort of a generic letter that could be basically about anyone, but we would actually like to feel that the emotion is there, that the teacher is really believing what they're writing about you and they are in earnest, rather than just giving someone a generic template and just filling in the blank spots where you have to write the name of the student, but is really in earnest and is really buttressed by factual information that they actually have about you. It should be concise. So I think I've mentioned this before, that quality should always come before quantity, but it doesn't mean that the letter of recommendation cannot be 1 or 2 pages. It should be more than that, probably. But being concise is very much of the essence, especially if we want to make sure that the admissions team officers can read your application effectively. And enthusiasm. I think this is also something when what maybe we mean by definitive vote of support, that the teacher or counselor who's writing the recommendation has an undeniable enthusiasm for the student in question. Shouldn't go over the top, but it should be sincere and coming from a real place. Okay, here in this next part, I wanted to give you some actual questions that might help you and your teacher in gathering the information that they might need for the letter of recommendation. Okay, so these are questions for the applicants themselves, so you as applicants. So what 2 or 3 activities or interests have meant the most to you in your academic career, in your secondary school career? So this is something that you should go ahead and maybe even try to come up with before you meet with your teacher or counselor and you discuss the details of your recommendation letter. Another question to consider is, what 3 words would you use to describe yourself? So this is where we encourage students to sort of come up with a brag sheet where they are trying to reflect on themselves as applicants. So it's also a good self-reflection practice or activity if you want to view it that way. And another question, what words would your teachers use? So what do you think your teachers think about you, or what qualities come to mind when they think about you as an applicant or student in their class? What about your parents, and what about your friends even? So it might be a good idea to just gather all these thoughts under one question. The next question would be, is your transcript a fair evaluation of you as a student? So does it really represent the qualities that you think you have, and why or why not? So this is also something important to reflect on, because this could be potentially something that your teacher could potentially explain or even clarify to the admissions team if something is in mismatch. And what do you plan to study in college? What specific experiences have helped you make this decision? So I think these are even like 2 very different topics, like what do you plan to study in college? So let's not forget that the teacher or counselor who's in question shouldn't just write this recommendation to you blindly, but they should also know about your aspirations, whether it's your career or academic journey that they are talking about, and what specific experiences have helped you make this decision. So not just the academic results, but also any leadership potential or capacity that you have already dedicated your time and effort to, and basically any experience that has formed the person that you are today as an applicant. Okay, I've told you the do's, and now I wanted to tell you what to try to avoid when it comes to the letters of recommendation. So we have already talked with Luca about the letters where students are writing the letter of recommendations themselves. So that's something that we would encourage to avoid. But also here are some more specific examples when it comes to the language, for example, word choice that is basic or something that is very lukewarm. So again, think about whether these words that they are using could be about anyone or are specific to you as an applicant. So this is where your brag sheet and what your teacher is actually conveying about you really meet in reality. A necessary repetition of information. So it doesn't mean that it cannot overlap with the information that's in your transcripts, your extracurricular and competition results and anything else. But even if it includes those, it should definitely provide some context or explanation around that, or as we said, examples, specific examples of that. Also, the same goes for statements, not backed up with specific examples. So if the teacher is making some especially heavy statements about you, they should try to make sure that they are also buttressing that or supporting that with specific examples from your career. And I think it goes without saying that they should try to avoid generic or cliché phrases. Again, those could be about anyone. So yeah. And when it comes to questionable phrases or phrases that could be about anyone, here I just wanted to include a few actual phrases when it comes to describing students. So some of the common expressions that we might come across when we see letters of recommendation are like this. The student ranks in the top half or was above average of their class. So in the case of NYU Abu Dhabi specifically, this might be sort of like a red flag for us when evaluating letters of recommendation, because when it comes to academics, we are a very selective university. So we are really looking for those students who are at the top of their classes. So even if this person is comparing the student to their actual class, they should make sure that the student is not just described as an average student, because it could be, again, anyone in their class. The student rarely missed an assignment, so that qualifies as standard behavior. So that's also something, and I think this is not the only example where we could say that standard behavior shouldn't really make it to the recommendation letter. Like also examples like someone was really nice to their teachers. So that's obviously standard behavior that we would expect anyways, and it goes without saying. So rarely missed as an assignment is not really a good sign. It's actually a red flag for us. So it really translates to missed an assignment at some point or even several. So we would also read within or between the lines where we are seeing or reading these letters of recommendation. Another example is listened, was respectful, paid attention, was on time. Again, it goes back to what I was saying about standard behavior. These are all standard behaviors. Leads by example. So this is maybe an overused generic expression. So we would definitely would like to see something more specific. So this is specifically trying to highlight leadership despite lack of concrete leadership positions. So even if your recommender is saying that about you, we would like to see specific examples of how this has been demonstrated in your academic career or extracurriculars. Accomplishments speak for themselves. Again, this is a very cliche phrase which doesn't really have any content, so to speak. Had a strong personality. So this is just a very specific example of how a red flag behavior might make it to the letter of recommendation. So this really translates to someone being hard to work with. When they were interested, when they set their minds to it, they were able to do X, Y, and Z. So this is translating into only when the student cared. And grades do not accurately measure ability. So you remember I talked about how teachers could have a role in explaining for certain academic disruptions or the mismatch between the actual abilities of a student and the actual results of the student. But this is something to avoid even when talking about that. So grades do not accurately measure ability. We would again like to see some specific explanation about that. And finally, steady improvement has potential and will keep become. So talking about potential is not really enough in the letter of recommendation, because again, we would like to see some tangible outcomes and examples of how you were already demonstrating these abilities. So it's not just a promise that they can imagine about you, but it also the actual realization of those qualities already in your high school career. And yeah, I'm really glad that we also have some time. I think so in this next part, I really wanted to, again, make it a bit more interactive and invite you to reflect on some specific case studies that I brought you today. I've actually brought three examples, but maybe I'm gonna try to include two if we have time, but definitely one of these should suffice. So here are a few questions to guide us in this discussion. So what aspects show room for improvement and what best practices are observed, meaning that based on what we have discussed here today and the do's and don'ts I have shown you today, what ideas come to mind, like how these recommendation letters could be improved or whether they are already observing those best practices. So here's an example. So these are going to be very extreme examples, as you will see. So here's the first example I would like to discuss with you. It says, Anna is a good student, be it academics or non-academics. Anna loves to top the class and quite a number of times has actually outdone the rest in the class. She has wide interest in sports and plays handball. And I highly recommend her for admission in your esteemed institution. So, what do you think about this recommendation letter? And there is no right or wrong answer to that. So I'm really curious.
There is no specific example of her being good at anything that they mentioned.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you, Nevena. So even though this is a good start, we would definitely like to see some more information, more factual
Yeah.
information, like examples. Yeah. Anything else?
I think maybe that professor should go more deeply about that student. And even I don't see that there is mentioned class. Then I
Mm-hmm.
don't think so. That it looks like some kind default recommendation letter to send to any kind of institution.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, that's also a very good summary. Thank you, Dishan. Like this is yeah exactly what we mean, and it could be about anyone really. So even if this person knows the student really well, they are not really making justice to that sort of depth or of the connection. Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, this is really there is really nothing else to cover about this. So um because of the time, I really wanted to jump to the third example to discuss this. So I'm going to do the same and read this out for us, and um, we can discuss again from the same perspective. So it goes like this. I had the pleasure of teaching Jane in her 11th grade honors English class. She's one of the most exceptional students I have encountered in my 16 years of teaching. From the first day of class, Jane impressed me with her ability to articulate about difficult concepts and texts, her sensitivity to the nuances within literature, and her passion for reading, writing, and creative expression, both in and out of the classroom. Jane is a talented literary critic and poet, but she also has a sharp eye for journalism. After being named editor-in-chief this year, Jane has worked tirelessly with her team in order to turn our scrappy student newspaper into an award-winning publication. And Jane is talented, caring, intuitive, dedicated, and focused in her pursuits. She consistently seeks out constructive feedback so she can improve her writing skills, which is a rare and impressive quality in a high school student. It is that eagerness and self-awareness that makes her a mature and perceptive learner. Jane is truly a standout individual who impresses everyone she meets, and she has my highest recommendation. So, what do you think about this one?
I think that professor here went more deeply about this student. There is mention that she attends English class and even her hobbies, that she's talented, and um, we can see that how she is interested and that positive side of this student.
Exactly. And I think what you mentioned about even outside the classroom. So I think that's certainly something extra that we would like to see in recommendation letters. So not just the interactions in the classroom, but it certainly adds a lot to the recommendation letter if the teacher is able to capture something that is outside the classroom, even extracurriculars or your personal life. So that really adds a certain extra flavor to the letter of recommendation. Anything else?
I agree that it's a very well written recommendation letter, but I would like to ask you as a professional if you see some flaws here, or if there are any, anything that you would that would bring a like a red flag for you as while you're reading this.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Luca. Thank you for asking. So I think I can definitely observe a few phrases that could even be like made better or some more um, like concrete information could be included. So for example, I think the last sentence, like Jane is a truly standout individual who impresses everyone she meets, and she has my highest recommendation. I think the teacher could definitely go into more detail about that. Like she impresses everyone she meets. So I think they could even bring some more examples of who are all those people, because this sounds a bit too overarching. So this is where I think, for example, some other teachers' evaluations or stories of the student could potentially be weighed in. So another thing is that I feel like this recommendation letter, even though this is a very like solid one, it's still a bit short for the recommendation letters that we would like to see from applicants. So I think this is a very good start, and maybe the teacher could go into more detail about each of these aspects. Like, for example, Dushan has mentioned that not just inside the classroom, but the student is like praised for their outside the classroom stuff. So maybe it would be a good idea to go into more detail about that. So maybe one could go through this whole recommendation letter and actually pinpoint those qualities or moments where we could bring even more stories and examples here. Like I would really want to read about that, how both in and outside the classroom they were able to demonstrate their creativity, especially outside the classroom. So I think these would be two main points. Like the closing is sounding maybe a bit cliche, and also the length. So I would love to see a bit more concise letter, like with more information, more specific moments about this student and more examples, even though it's as you said, a very good and solid start. So this would qualify as a very good recommendation letter, but it could even be made more better if the teacher wanted to take some more time. Yeah. Thank you, Luca, for asking. All right. Um, so thank you so much for the attention about the first part of the presentation and also for discussing these case studies with me. And here I just like to dedicate some minutes because we have 6 minutes to go. I would just like to give you some space, whether you have any lingering questions about your existing recommendation letter or about your upcoming recommendation processes.
I have a question. If we want to pursue recommendation letter from our professor, tutor, or coach from extracurriculars, how that letter should be written and what it should consist of, like what we are interested in, how we helped in that activity, what we did there, or how it should be structured.
Mhm. The structure itself, I think it can take the usual structure. And again, I think the middle part is the more important one, where it should actually like echo some topics or highlights that are also seen in maybe other recommendation letters. So it can even overlap with what your teacher from one of your subjects is saying about you in terms of the extracurriculars, like some common themes, and also like any leadership capacity that you were able to demonstrate, and any of those personal qualities that we can also see demonstrated elsewhere in your application material. So it's not so much about the form itself, but or the structure itself, but rather about the contents of the application material. So yeah, I think that would be my answer. But yeah, so talking about extracurriculars, so it's definitely a good idea to, besides a teacher who's teaching you a subject or a counselor who's a counselor at your school to you, to even include someone, a coach, as for example, Dushan said, or basically anyone in a leadership capacity to you outside the classroom who is able to talk about your specific strengths and your development story, your personal development, and how you were able to demonstrate those unique characteristics that we can also see in other parts of your application, your personal statement, your academics, extracurriculars, etc. And finally, I also wanted to give you my contact details. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm always happy to answer any questions, even if it's your teacher who has some questions, even if it's not related to NYU or NYU Abu Dhabi specifically. I'm happy to help with any of this that we have discussed here today. And I also want to wish everyone the very best of luck with your university applications.